Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We are thrilled to have you with us for this conversation, and I'm grateful to our partners, Smart Church Solutions and Michael Aycock from our Presbyterian friend down in Charlotte, joining for what will be an insightful conversation into what you need to know. This is an example of the content that we provide for our parish administrators, lay leaders throughout the year. We invite you, if you are a member and a parish administrator and not part of our parish administrator cohort, to be in touch with us. The information is in the text box right now about how to get in touch. If you are not a member and would like to be part of that parish administrator cohort that meets regularly, please let us know and we'll be in touch. But excited for this conversation. It was great to see many of you in Jacksonville a couple of weeks ago for a really uplifting, wonderful conference. Thank you for attending. We'll look forward to seeing many of you in Houston next year. And if you need anything at any point, don't hesitate to be in touch with us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lee and our partners, Michael and Tim. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joe. We're thrilled to be here and really thrilled to talk more about this topic today. In terms of introduction, my name is Lee with Smart Church Solutions. I head up some of the sales and marketing for our team. I will not be leading the discussion today, but I have a very qualified person who shares my last name that will be talking with us today, Tim Cool. He is our Chief Solutions Officer, and as Joe alluded, we do also have Michael Aycock. Pleasure to have him. Myers Park Presbyterian Church, he is the Operations Director there. His church is actually like 10, 15 minutes from my house, so we're good friends too. Have seen each other at conferences and all that kind of stuff. So Tim, I'll pass it over to you. You want to share a little bit about who you are and what we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about the things that what you don't know can they can actually hurt you. And so we want to talk about some of the things that it's really important that as an administrator or a lay leader at your church that you stay on top of. And so I'm going to share my screen and I'll give it a second here. It says it's loading. Okay, is everybody able to see my screen okay?
Gotcha.
Great, perfect. So let me get started here with what we're going to jump into. And there we go. So we entitled this, You Don't Know What You Don't Know. And unfortunately, sometimes what you don't know are things that can hurt you. And we refer to facility management as what we call facility stewardship, which is a form of having something entrusted to you. So we take very seriously the whole idea of things being entrusted, and my screen is...
Uh-oh, we're getting some freezing on him. That's a beautiful face to screenshot though, isn't it, guys? Oh, you're back.
Okay, I'm back. I'm having trouble with Zoom again. So I'm going to not try to run my slideshow.
Send me your slides. I'll run with it.
Now I'm good.
Okay.
So let me do this. I'll throw up my screen again. I'm not going to throw it up, but I'm going to put it back up again. There we go. So I'm not going to hide my I'm just going to do these one at a time. So quote from a pastor down in Texas, Tony Evans, that said, consequences happen whenever we seek to act as an owner of what God has entrusted us with to steward. And I wrote a book a couple of years ago called Entrusted. And so for many of you, particularly in your parishes and across the country, you may be more familiar with the term creation care. And creation care for us is what we consider to be entrusted, that God has entrusted to us, creation, the earth. That also means that he's entrusted to us our church facilities, our parishes, our parish halls, our sanctuaries, our schools and whatnot. And so it's our responsibility to take this seriously. And the best way to take things seriously is you've got to face reality. The challenge is many of us don't understand what the realities are when it's related to our facilities. I came from a preacher's home, not Episcopal, although I played in a brass quintet at Episcopal Church all through college, which was quite fun. Outside of Kenyon College, for those of you who are familiar with the Northeast Ohio Episcopal School. But facing reality is a critical component, and it starts with facing the facts. Do we have the facts in place to know what it is that we're doing? So a couple of years ago, our team, in the midst of COVID, when there was less things to do than there are now, we did a national benchmarking report. We talked to hundreds of churches across the country, asked them questions, gathered information and whatnot. So I want to share with you some of the facts that came out of this. And benchmarking is nothing more than evaluating or checking as a comparison to a standard. So our benchmarking has over 50 pages long. We've looked at facilities mainly in the 30,000 to 200,000 square foot range. We had some smaller, some larger. It took us over 6 months to assemble this, and it's a free download on our website. And I'm sure Lee can pop that in the chat for you if anybody wants it. But let me give you an overview of all of the churches that we were able to assess as part of this benchmarking. We had combined utilities about $1.38 a square foot. And let me just back up a second. Everything, or the majority of what I'm going to talk about, is going to be based on a per square foot basis. It is paramount that you as a parish leader and your facility teams understand how many square feet you have, because most benchmarking is done on a square foot basis. And there's a key reason for this, is people will ask me, well, what percentage of church budget should be facilities? And that's just not the right question, because let's say you have 50,000 square feet and your church budget goes down 20%. You still have the same amount of square footage that you have to steward. So in that case, your percentage actually needs to go up because your budget has gone down overall. So we try to focus everything on square footage. So these numbers that you see on the screen are dollars per square foot annually. So if you take $1.38 times 12, that was the average for combined utilities, custodial staffing, maintenance, and whatnot. On average, the respondents came back at about $5.54 a square foot. We found it sometimes closer to $6, maybe $6.50. So it would indicate to us that the initial respondents were coming in a little bit lower than we found. Now, Michael, I think your experience may be closer to that $5.50 a square foot range. Is that right?
That's right. We're running, we have about 190,000 square feet, and we're running about $5.52, just right below that. So, and we feel like our budget is fairly healthy. We wish we had a little bit more for an older building use, 80 plus years old with a lot of stone and architecture. And so a little bit more would be helpful, but we feel like we're holding pretty good around that 552 is actually about where we are.
Yeah, so one of the reasons why Lee and I wanted to have Michael involved here, number one, he's really smart. But beyond that, the church that Michael's involved with at Myers Park Presbyterian, as Michael said, it's over 80 years old. It's got a lot of limestone or granite. It's got stained glass. It's got large wood ceilings. It has a pipe organ. And so while he is a kissing cousin as a Presbyterian to the Episcopals, his building is very similar to what I'm sure many of your parishes look like in the elements and the components. And so we wanted Michael to be involved because he understands the complexity of that with that type of building. So when we have done our best practices, and this is from our own research as well as IFMA, and if you're not familiar with IFMA, it stands for International Facility Managers Association. It is the largest trade organization for facility management in the world. They're not church-centric, obviously, but they are a tremendous source of resources. So utilities, $1 to $1.50 a square foot is kind of the range that we believe is the most efficient for churches. General maintenance, which includes painting, light bulbs, HVAC maintenance, break fix kind of things. Anything that gets broken needs fixed, caulking your windows and those type of things. Then janitorial is obviously the cleaning of your building. In that is paper products for your public restrooms. It also will include major glass cleaning, as well as floor waxing, carpet extraction, carpet cleaning kind of things, and so on. So those are the numbers that we find that work most prevalently in churches that are doing extremely well. So let's just use the utilities for a second. Take your square footage, and I hope you know your square footage. If not, ask your facility manager. Take your utility bills, divide it by your square footage, and it should give you this range. If you're over $1.50, I can assure you, you're in trouble. You're spending too much money on utilities. And it's usually driven by one of two things: either outdated equipment and or poor behavior. And poor behavior generally refers to things like, oh, we just let our air conditioning run day and night. That's poor behavior. Now, for many of you who have older facilities, you probably have a third component, that you have facilities that are no longer energy efficient. You've got single pane glass, you've got air leakage, you've got high volume spaces that make it harder to cool and heat, and so on. So there's always nuances to it, but that's the range that we generally find to be an acceptable range. So operations. We're going to talk later about there being 4 buckets to maintaining your building. You've got operations, you've got deferred maintenance, you've got life cycle planning, and your projects, your major projects. So that's why you see a bucket on the screen. The first bucket is this operational, which is the utilities, the janitorial, and the general maintenance. It also includes your staffing. And so we have determined that you need about 1 full-time facility person for every 35,000 square feet of facilities to keep it maintained at a level that's necessary. So according to IFMA, the natural rate of deterioration of a building is 1 to 4% a year. So you need to be spending between 1 and 4% a year of your current replacement value, not what it costs to build the building. Your current replacement value, just to keep it current. That's not improving it, that's just keeping it at the current rate of deterioration, because every natural resource on Earth is going to deteriorate. So that is a big item for most churches. So let's look at utilities as how it related to our benchmarking study. So you can see here, a lot of them in the 120, 169, 150. So the highs, we had some that were way outside of the range of efficiency. To put it into perspective, if you're spending $1.74 on 200,000 square feet, and I'm going to do the math. Let me take my shoes off so I can do the math real quick here. So I'll need to count my toes. If you had 200,000 square feet and you were spending $1.74, you're spending almost $50,000 a year more than you should be for utilities. That's a lot of money. And that's money that, if you could get that under control, could go into capital reserves or to eliminate deferred maintenance without having to raise more money. It's just getting that under control. Let me go back to this one slide. So you notice up here under the median and the low for the smaller square footages, just because those are in a less than $1 a square foot range does not mean that they are superstars in energy efficiency. What we generally find is in many of the smaller church buildings that we work with, they're using the building less often. And so our numbers are based upon a 6-day-a-week usage. And so if you're a 2-day-a-week, 3-day-a-week, you could be under $1 a square foot for utilities and still be wasting utilities. And so just because you might be under $1 a square foot, don't let that fool you to think that you're being really, really good at it. Other components were with our maintenance and custodial. We found that in nearly every case, the churches that responded were significantly under budget. So one of the things that our firm does is we provide facility condition assessment where we go out and we assess buildings. Last year, 2022, we assessed 2.75 to 3 million square feet of church facilities and found nearly $60 million in deferred maintenance. In the 8-9 years that we've been doing assessments, for every church that has deferred maintenance, and I assure you it's 100% of every church we've ever done, there are 2 empirical reasons why they have deferred maintenance. One is they're underfunding their maintenance budget. The second is they're understaffing their maintenance team. What happens when you don't have enough money and you don't have enough staff? You put things off, which is the definition of deferred. And so now you create deferred maintenance. And so, and I understand, I'm a realist. I understand that there are times that you just don't have the money to do things. And I get that, but we need to be constantly reevaluating it, because what happens if you let deferred maintenance go? Well, eventually deferred maintenance exponentially gets worse and worse and worse. In fact, $1 saved today may cost you $4 at the next point of failure. Well, that becomes a significant issue. And what happens if you don't fund these things properly? And these are pictures from real churches that we've assessed. You know, this is pretty gnarly kind of looking stuff. Did I just say gnarly? I did, didn't I? I'm sorry. I've embarrassed myself already. The other thing that makes this even worse is not only are most churches significantly understaffed, but we looked at what happens, what are they doing with their time? And we asked the question is, what percentage of your staff is performing custodial and or maintenance tasks during the day? And according to the respondents, only 65% of the time was their custodial personnel doing on-task items. So that may mean that they're either standing around or they're having conversations or they're delivering water bottles to different parts of the parish, or maybe they're setting up a classroom, which is technically not a janitorial or custodial responsibility. What was worse is the maintenance personnel spending only about 50% of their time on task. So we have the potential of increasing our efficiency by anywhere from 13 to 20 hours a week in what appears to be lost time by keeping our staff on task, which means they need to know what the tasks are, and then allowing them to stay focused on that. I shared recently with another group that I was in San Diego working with a church doing an assessment. And in the middle of it, 2 of their facility guys, and they were already understaffed, had a hand cart full of bottled water that they were taking around to the offices. And while that sounds productive, these are guys that are skilled carpenters and electricians and facility maintenance guys that had been relegated to take water. Talk about carrying your water for you. They literally were carrying the water for the rest of the staff, which means they weren't on the roof. They weren't looking at plumbing issues. They weren't doing the things that were on task for them. Michael, how do you guys feel you are doing with a staffing perspective?
We're probably close to your estimate early on of 30, one custodial / janitor / day porter per 35,000 square feet, but they're not working as efficiently as you're talking about with janitor. If one was assigned mainly janitor duties, they're doing some of that water carrying too, what I call day porter stuff. So they're off doing some of that. We do factor that in a little bit. So we know that there's some things that aren't being cleaned as well, or areas that don't get hit every day. So we allow for a little bit of that time, but it is definitely something to look at for split duties.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So a couple interesting things that came out of the benchmarking regarding housekeeping and janitorial. is we ask the question, do you use dilution control? Michael, do you guys use the dilution control?
Yes, we do. We don't want to pay to ship water.
Yeah, exactly. So we had 51% say yes, 48% no. So basically split. So when we talk creation care, or we talk about what some people, tongue-in-cheek tree hugging, you don't have to be a tree hugger to want to go green. And going green, think about the extra weight that vehicles have to ship water with a little bit of chemical in it, or ship bottles, or the amount of boxes that it takes. So, think of dilution control options, and there's a bunch of them. You can use tablets, you can use concentrate. I personally like the wall pack systems because your chemicals come from a chemical company. You use your own bottles over and over again. You use your own water, and you just put in what you need. And we just find that to be incredibly helpful. Michael, are you guys using that system or using tablets?
We're using the dilution system like your picture there. And just as a footnote, if you put chemicals in bottles, you got to have labels on bottles too.
So how vigilant are you guys with your SDS manuals?
We're a 75% diligent.
Okay.
So we have a MSDS book is the way I call it. We have a book available with our chemical cut sheets in it. Is it super up to date? Maybe not, but we try. Most of it's the recent chemicals that we standardized a couple of years back.
Yeah, well, the fact that you've even taken the steps is better than generally what we find. But to Michael's point, if you're using your own bottles, make sure that they're properly labeled. Because one of the things that we as a church, and I'm using capital C church here, fail to realize that we're still subject to OSHA and to MSDS, or what's referred to as SDS books now. We have to keep these things current. I mean, if an OSHA inspector came on, if he looks at your ladders, is he going to see the weight limits on the ladder? If he doesn't, you're subject to a fine. Same thing with chemicals. If they're not properly labeled, you have the potential of being fined. But even worse than the fine is what happens if someone uses the wrong chemical on the wrong application, or somehow or another accidentally spills something on themselves, or ingests something and they don't know what it is. I mean, now all of a sudden we have all sorts of other liabilities. So we asked the churches, how important is it to go green? And less than 50% thought that it was important to go green. That was really frustrating for me, because going green is as simple as turning off the faucet when you're brushing your teeth, or whatever else it is. There are so many things. It doesn't have to mean solar panels. It doesn't have to mean water collection. Those are fine, but they can be an extreme. There's plenty of other things that we can be doing. So related again to cleaning again, we looked at staff cleaning, and we asked, is it insourced, outsourced? Is it volunteered? And majority of people said insourced, about 50% said outsourced. Now, if you look, my insourced and outsourced add up to 115%, because some of them responded as being both. They insourced general cleaning, but then for their school or their daycare, they outsourced it because it needed to happen more often, and it needed to meet certain regulations that their state required. So we found that to be interesting. Maintenance staffing, very, very heavy on the insource. And that totally makes sense, with the exception of some of your major technical items. Sometimes HVAC, electrical, plumbing, you really shouldn't have in-house staff doing significant items. I mean, changing a filter is one thing, but changing out a motor that has electrical current that's going to it, you really need to have a licensed electrician or HVAC contractor or someone else to do that. So speaking about HVAC, let's look for a minute at some of the questions we asked about HVAC. The first one was we asked, how often do you change your filters? And I was really encouraged to see that 70% change their filters monthly or quarterly. If you add semi-annually in there, we're up to 95%, which was really encouraging to see that many people doing being at least that proactive. I realize that with some of your 6-inch and 5-inch filters that they say you can go semi-annually. Yeah, you still probably need to check it more often than that. Matter of fact, one of the men on our staff used to be the operations pastor of a church in Texas. And he told me that he's purposely checked them monthly and would go in and replace his filters. He'd buy the cheap ones from Lowe's or Home Depot. And I said, that seems like overkill. Why not do it quarterly? He goes, I wanted to have a reason to go to every unit, change the filter, but then also see if there was anything else going wrong with it. Did I hear funny noises? Did the belts look like they were slipping? Was there vibration? Was there excess dirt? And most of the time they were on the roof, which means he got to look at the roof at the same time. So he was killing multiple birds with one stone by forcing himself to change his filters on a monthly basis. So just something to do. How often do you guys change yours, Michael?
We change them quarterly. The other thing I thought of, Tim, is when we went into COVID, a lot of churches changed their filters to a higher level, more like a MERV 13 type of thing, and that means the weave is a little tighter, so you might have more accumulation to block the air than you normally would. So you may have to change them more often if you went to a tighter filter. Yeah,
excellent. The MERV 13s become enormously popular during COVID, and they do a good job in gathering particulates. So, but just know that you are going to have to change them more often. Excellent. So then we asked, what kind of HVAC controls are you using? We had 8.7% response to time clock, and I have no clue what that means. Actually, I do, but it just seems like something that maybe falls into the line of Fred Flintstone, but that's just me. You had non-programmable thermostats. The majority were using some form of a building automation system. I know, Michael, you've got a building automation system with JACEs and Tritium and all the good stuff that goes with it, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You know, programmable Wi-Fi and then programmable non-Wi-Fi thermostats. So it was interesting to see that you know, the preponderance were using something that could be regulated, whether through a programmable thermostat or a building automation system. Then we asked the question, how many hours per week does it take you to manage the controls? And 50% said less than 1 hour. The other 50% is more than 1 hour. And in some cases, you know, 2 to 4 hours, 4 to 6 hours. So then we asked, or we looked at time spent. If you're spending 1 to 4 hours a week, and let's assume you're paying your people $20 an hour, and you assume 3 hours a week for 95% of the respondents. That equates to $60 a week to manage thermostats or your building automation system, which equates to over $3,000 a year. And if you're at a higher percentage bracket, if you're in that 7.5% that's spending 4 to 8 hours, I mean, wow, you've more than doubled. And so be thinking about whether or not that's an efficient way of utilizing your staff. So when you think about your facility maintenance staff, if they're spending 6 hours a week out of their 40 hours changing temperature set points, that means they're not getting to the other things that need to be fixed. So this is a prime opportunity for you to consider, how do you automate the HVAC components? So we asked them, do you integrate with your event calendars? And only 24% said that they do. So if there is a way that you could have your whatever you use to manage your events, if it could turn on and off your air conditioning system when the event's scheduled, it gives you an opportunity to not just buy back the time, so anywhere from 1 to 6 hours a week that you're buying back the time, you're also likely going to save energy because you're only going to have the air conditioning systems run when you need them to run. But then in addition, there's a third savings, and that's what's called runtime. So if you've ever been to an auction where they sell used police cars, you may find a used police car that's only 5 years old that has close to 400,000 miles on it. Well, that means that the runtime of that engine is probably a 20 to 25 year runtime, which means it's going to be approaching end of life sooner than what the body and other components of the car may be. Same thing happens with your HVAC. A typical direct expansion, what's called DX HVAC systems, 15 years is the typical manufacturer suggestion. You might get 18 if you really maintain it well. But if you're able to only use the systems when you have rooms being occupied, you can reduce the runtime, which has the potential of extending the life, assuming that you also maintain it the way you're supposed to with proper filter changes and general preventive maintenance. Michael, do you guys do a twice-a-year preventive maintenance on your systems?
We call for it as needed. I watch it. You know, we don't have a contract for it. The other thing I might add, Tim, is don't feel overwhelmed if you don't have this system. Put it in phases. We did this a couple of years ago, and even though I do use the building automation system, I still have a building that that doesn't have it. So we're about to renovate that building, and we will add it. So I would highly encourage you, don't feel overwhelmed. Just add it to your big spaces or most used spaces first. You'll get more bang for your buck there. And especially, you know, talking about the most over or underutilized spaces in, you know, kind of America is a sanctuary, right? At least hours, in my experience, you use it one day a week or a couple of days a week for that 1 hour, and it sits there heating and cooling all week long, sometimes all night long. I would, you know, setting those back to an occupied schedule is kind of what some of the terminology is. To pull it back is a good thing to think about. You have to talk with your music people from time to time, because organs don't like a lot of humidity, but you can find ways to turn that temperature down, up and down as needed without heating and cooling very large spaces.
Yeah, Lee?
Yeah, Tim, I had a question come up. There's a basic formula for what to charge per square foot for renting a space. The question is there a formula on how to compute utility costs into that? Their facility is used by the community. I guess, how do you compute the utility cost for things like rentals and what to charge?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, you know, if you know what your total dollar per square foot is for utilities, if you could then determine the square footage of the entire zone that is involved with that rental. So they may be only renting one room, but you've got to energize the entire zone. So it may be renting a room of 1,000 square feet, but the zone is 8,000 square feet. So your utility costs need to take into account the total conditioned space that's required for that event. And so you could use that same square footage calculation, but don't base it just on the individual room itself. Base it on the total required conditioned space to have that room conditioned.
I might add to that, Tim, your main lobby. So
yes,
you're conditioning a space that is on a different air handler for that system, and then you have to condition other bathrooms or lobbies or other things just for traffic flow, then that's a part of it too. And if you can get down to a number, I usually use the term direct cost. If it costs us, you know, based on that calculation, X amount of dollars, then that's what we charge you. We don't uptick that or anything else. If we can get anything, we'll be in better shape. So if it's the direct cost, if you from zero of nothing on to turning something on is that direct cost.
Excellent. So let's look at then capital reserves. That's kind of the third bucket. We're not going to talk much today about deferred maintenance because we're really talking about what you need to know. But deferred maintenance is something you do need to know, because if you don't know how much deferred maintenance you have, how will you know how to attack it? And we've worked with enough churches and parishes over the last several years, particularly during COVID, that have had to drastically reduce the use of their buildings or even decide to close their doors altogether because they could no longer keep up with the deferred maintenance. So the life cycle planning is what I refer to as an inevitable cost. You will replace every air conditioner, you will replace every roof and every stitch of carpet and your paving. These are not if questions. These are when and how much. So they're inevitable. They are going to happen. There's no way around it. So there's 3 facts that we're going to look at real quickly. Number one, all buildings deteriorate at an annual rate of 1 to 4%. I've already shared that. And that's an annual rate of deterioration based on your current replacement value. So if it was built in 1950s, it's not what it would cost to build it. It's if you had to replace it today, and most of you should have that from your insurance agent already. What's it going to cost to replace it today? And just know that 1 to 4% is going to be the deterioration rate. As such, nearly every physical component of your facility will have to be replaced or have a major overhaul, which means you're going to have dollars, money, not the promise of money, not the hope of money. It's real dollars set aside. We like to think of a capital reserve account as kind of a retirement account for your building. Well, hopefully you never fully retire your building. You will retire and replace the majority of its components. And so think of it in terms of how do I set dedicated money aside? So I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but I'm taking my retirement planning a lot more serious right now. And I'm not setting it aside with the intent that I'm going to use it tomorrow. I'm hoping to use it in years down the road. So I put a systematic amount in, hopefully to increase over with the return of investment of some interest is some kind of a vehicle that's making money. And many of you have endowments, and so you already have that. But having that set aside with a plan, you need to know about how much you need. It wouldn't do me any good to plan for retirement if I didn't know how much money I was going to need at the point of retirement. So, an HVAC system today, if I bought it brand new today for $10,000, it might cost me $18,000, $20,000, $22,000 when it's time to replace it in X number of years. So be thinking of your retirement planning. So in our benchmarking, we then asked, do you fund a capital reserve? Well, right off the bat, that question made me ecstatic because this has not been my norm. Almost 79% said yes. Well, the second question brought it all back to reality for me, which was, how do you fund a capital reserve? So 41% basically based on whatever the project projected needs are. 17% based on desired amount to be. Oh, we just hope it's going to be this amount, so we're going to put it in there. We put 35% when we can afford it. So if you can't afford it, do you have a conversation with your HVAC unit that year to let it know it can't go out? Sorry, Mr. HVAC, don't go out this year. Some had a percentage of gross receipts, some a percentage of net receipts. Some was a percentage of budget overage, and then other. When we re-looked at that and analyzed it, 60% did not have a defensible plan. A defensible plan is, we have these pieces of equipment. They have X amount of remaining useful life. It's going to cost this to replace it in today's dollars. We anticipate X amount of inflation over the next number of years during its remaining useful life. And so I'm going to need X amount of dollars. That's a defensible plan. So Peter Drucker, the master of management, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And so it doesn't do us any good just to wish and hope that we're going to have money available for capital reserves. Because remember, it's inevitable. It's gonna happen. And so one of the things that we've developed as part of a tool we call a life cycle calculator allows you to list out your items and your current replacement value. And your, like here, this first line item here, $25,000 is what it would cost me today in 15 years at a 3% inflation rate. I'm going to need $38,000. So I need to be setting aside $2,500 a year so that I have that money when it's time. Well, what happens if I can get 16 years out of it instead of 15? Well, guess what? You've got more cash available. That's great. You've saved your parish dollars in year 15. You've allowed it to continue to accumulate and grow. Now you've got more money. What a great concept. The reason this is so critical for me is when we look at the total cost of owning a church building. Now you notice I didn't say the cost of building a church building, because it's pretty easy to quantify what it costs to build a building. Although if you've tried to build anything in the last 3 years, it's just stupid numbers. Ever since we've gone through the supply chain issues and COVID and so on. But we did an assessment of the cost of owning a building over a 40-year life cycle. You had about 3% of it was design and construction managers' fees. About 6% was what we refer to as the cost of money or the cost of financing, basically interest on that money. About 20% over a 40-year period was the actual cost of sticks and bricks. Over 71% was the cost of operating the building. So when you look at a 40-year-old building, and my guess is most of you fall into that 30, 40 to 100-year-old building, the majority of the cost to operate and own the building is an operational cost. When we look at maintenance, repairs, utilities, janitorial, capital reserves, all of your renewals that you need to do, your major upgrades over the years, adding your handicap accessibility that you didn't have 30 and 40 years ago, going to LEDs from old fluorescents and old incandescents. Be thinking about what it really is costing you. And as you look at that pie chart, this is the kind of thing that your CFOs and your finance committees and whatnot really need to grasp, is that the majority of your money to own a building is going to happen in operation cost. It is probably one of the most significant things that we try to help churches understand, is that don't get enamored with the new shiny thing, whatever that new shiny thing is, whether it's a new building, a new pipe organ, a new AV system. Everything has a long-term cost to owning it. And what is that cost going to be? So Joe, I think you were going to jump in here and provide a word before we take some additional questions, or Lee, do you have something?
Well, if Joe would like to go first, I have a couple questions I'd like your take on, Tim, but we'll let Joe advise if he has anything first. No, he just dropped something in the chat here with a lot of really good info.
Okay, great.
Well, hey, what I'll do, I'll go ahead and run off through some questions here.
Yeah.
And Joe, feel free to cut me off, but there's a lot of conversations going on right now too.
Go for it.
Thank you, Joe. Yep. We have a number of folks in here that have some older buildings, and they're trying to determine, hey, these numbers, they look great, but are they still relevant for a 150-year-old, 300-year-old church? What are your thoughts on the age factor, Tim?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the age factor, what we generally find is that there's a significant amount of deferred maintenance. And deferred maintenance doesn't always mean that it's deteriorating. In the way we look at deferred maintenance could also mean that you don't have money set aside to address it when it reaches remaining useful life. And so there's a combination of, yes, it's deteriorated, it's deferred, we didn't fix these things, we now have wood rot, we now have a carpet that's way outdated. Or it could mean that we've got HVAC systems that only have 3 to 4 years of life left, and we have no money set aside for it. That's equivalent to deferred maintenance as well, because you're going to be surprised with it. So the first thing, particularly with an older building, is understand your deferred maintenance. For many of you that have a buildings that are 100, 150 years old, we did an assessment for Christ Church Cathedral in Indianapolis, which has a wonderful endowment from Eli Lilly, as many of you may know. But when we looked at theirs, they had tuck pointing issues with their limestone and their granite that needed to be redone. They had slate roofs, they had copper gutters. And so in a lot of those cases, you get a longer life cycle, but then your replacement cost is significantly more. I mean, to replace a slate roof today, could be 10, 20, 30 times more than the cost of replacing a shingled roof. And so what we have generally found is the life cycle of it all works out to about the same. So if I have my shingled roof and I'm setting aside money to replace it in 20 years, and I have my slate roof and it's going to be not replaced for 50 years, it may be the same amount of money I need to set aside year after year. I just have longer to do it with some of my component parts. Your HVAC costs or your utility costs could be higher if you have an older building that's not been brought up to any set of energy efficiency. If you haven't addressed windows, doors, efficiency lighting, you may not have proper insulation. And so in those cases, you may have to adjust your utility costs accordingly. The cost of cleaning should be the cost of cleaning. There should be a significant amount of change there. Could be a little bit of increase in general maintenance. Again, particularly if you've got tuck pointing and things that need to be done on a more regular basis, you may end up with a little higher general maintenance. You have something else, Lee?
The other question, the other factor coming into play is geographical locations. And I know at the beginning of the webinar, we stated that this is national averages, but and obviously the folks in California will have some higher expenses relative to South Dakota for certain things. But what about in terms of climate, where you have some places that never have to turn on the air conditioning? How do the numbers line up for that kind of thing?
Yeah, so you may not turn on the air conditioning, but you're definitely turning on the heat. And so your utility costs are generally going to be balanced. Again, we had churches from all over the country. Now, I can tell you right now that if you're in Manhattan, my utility numbers, just throw them out the window. Because if you're paying Con Edison prices in Manhattan, you're probably paying $3, $4 a square foot. I did a workshop for a Reformed Jewish group in Manhattan. And when I mentioned $1.50, they just all broke out laughing. Because all of them were paying between $3.50 and $5 a square foot for utilities. And they're just taxed to death up there. And so, there's some of those kind of things that they just need to, take into account. We were asked a week or two ago by another administrator that said, hey, since COVID and the supply chain issues, should we be bumping those numbers up? And my opinion is you need to localize those numbers a little bit. If you're in a metropolitan area where costs have skyrocketed, you may need to inflation impact those. But you may be in some areas where we've actually seen some of the costs go down. And so you got to use your own best judgment. And here's kind of my take on it, is having these numbers as a target. If you overshoot it, God love you, you got extra money. If you undershoot it by just a little bit, because rarely except for Manhattan have I seen the numbers way high, you're still going to be better off than if you were using antiquated numbers from years ago.
And Michael, I know your facility was built in a couple different phases. How old is your original building?
About the 1920s or so, and we have some, a lot of plaster and lath. We have a slate roof, that type of stuff. Some very ornate type wood in the sanctuary. So it takes a little bit to keep some of that up. Yep, pews too. Pews sometimes, people sit on those week over week, right, in their same spot, and they get rickety.
Yeah, I remember. Nathan Parr on our team actually did a facility condition assessment for a cathedral. I forget where it was located, but I think it was built in like the 1820s. And it is a total different type of beast. The materials used and everything related to it. It's a different kind of facility to look at. So I understand a lot of the questions, but a lot of the facts still come out remaining the same.
Yeah, so Lee, let me hit on just a couple of resources real quick. We've got a free ebook on our website, the 4 buckets of church facility budgeting, which is a tremendous tool. I already mentioned our benchmarking report. Again, it's a free resource. I also wanted to mention, because this is really exciting for us, is we do facility condition assessments all across the country. And we just signed an agreement with the Diocese of Southern Ohio to do 71 of their parishes for them. The diocese is actually paying us to come out to every one of the dioceses and do a full-blown assessment so they can know, are they operating efficiently from a facility standpoint, and how much deferred maintenance do they have? How much should they be setting up in life cycle costs? And so this just happened actually this week. And so we're really excited. We're going to be starting here in about 60 days with them. And they gave us permission to let you all know that that was something that we were doing with them, but real excited to be involved at the diocese level and not just the local parish level, which is really cool.
I got to echo that too. Well, first, I'm going to drop in the chat that link for the free ebook on the 4 buckets of budgeting. Please go check that out. That's one of our first ebooks we did, and it's a really good one. For the facility condition assessments, what I thought was really cool is they obviously had a pilot they tested, and Nathan went on site there about a month and a half ago, and it's always really cool to watch the eyes open. At first, we get churches and folks that are really mad at us, and then they're like, "Oh, I'm actually really glad that you brought this up, and now we have something we need to address." So anyway, I find that cool being on the receiving end. But
great. Well, Joe, I'm going to toss it over to you unless I mention this.
No, I think that's actually all we got for today. Just wanted to say thank you, Tim, for sharing your knowledge, and Michael for joining us, and Joe, of course. We appreciate the partnership with you all, and thank you so much for hosting us today and letting us come and share a little bit more information here. All right, well, we hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day and have a great week. Take care, everyone.